Lucy Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she untied her apron. The clock on the diner wall showed 9:30 p.m., and her feet ached from standing for 12 hours straight. She had worked the morning shift, then stayed for the evening shift. When another waitress called in sick, the extra money would help, but she was exhausted. "See you tomorrow, Lucy," called Amy Rodriguez from behind the counter. Amy was her best friend and the only person who truly understood how hard Lucy was working just to survive. "Yeah, see you," Lucy replied, grabbing her worn jacket from the hook by the door. The fabric was thin and had a small tear near the left shoulder, but it was all she had for the cold October weather. As she stepped outside, the first drops of rain hit her face. The sky had been gray all day, threatening a storm. Lucy pulled her jacket tighter and started walking toward her apartment building 6 blocks away. She could not afford a car, and the bus had stopped running an hour ago. By the time she reached the 3rd block, the rain was coming down hard. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by loud thunder that made her jump. Lucy started walking faster, her old sneakers splashing through puddles that were getting deeper by the minute. She was thinking about the bills waiting on her kitchen table when she saw them. A man and a small boy stood next to a fancy black car on the side of the road. The hood was up and steam was rising from the engine. The man was on his phone, but he looked frustrated. The little boy was shivering in the rain. Lucy slowed down. She knew she should just keep walking. It was late, it was raining, and she did not know these people. But the child looked so cold and scared. The boy could not be more than 8 years old, and he was getting soaked. The man noticed her watching and ended his phone call. He was tall and well-dressed, wearing an expensive-looking suit that was now getting ruined by the rain. Even wet, he looked like he had money. His dark hair was neat, and his face was clean-shaven. He looked like the kind of person who never had to worry about rent money. "Excuse me," the man called out to her. "I'm sorry to bother you, but do you know if there's a hotel nearby? Our car broke down, and my son is getting sick from this rain." Lucy looked at the boy again. His lips were turning blue, and he was coughing. She could see he was trying not to cry, but he was clearly miserable. The man put his arm around the boy's shoulders, trying to protect him from the rain. "There's a motel about 2 miles down the road," Lucy said, raising her voice over the storm. "But they're probably full. There's a big festival in town this weekend, and most places are booked up." The man's face fell. "We called 3 different places already. No rooms anywhere." He looked down at his son with worry in his eyes. "Jake, how are you feeling?" The boy named Jake coughed again. "I'm cold, Dad, really cold." Lucy felt her heart break a little. She thought about her own childhood, when her family had been caught in bad weather with nowhere to go. She remembered how scared she had felt, and how grateful she had been when someone helped them. She looked at her apartment building, just 3 blocks away. It was small and not very nice, but it was warm and dry. She had a couch, and she could make some hot soup. These strangers could be dangerous, but the little boy was sick, and she could not just walk away. "Look," she said, making a decision she hoped she would not regret. "I live just down the street. It's not much, but you and your son could stay the night if you want. Just until the storm passes, and you can get your car fixed." The man stared at her in surprise. "That's very kind of you, but we couldn't impose like that. We're complete strangers." "It's okay," Lucy said, though her voice shook a little. "I have a couch you could sleep on, and your son could take my bed. I work at the diner, so I'm used to staying up late anyway." Jake looked up at his father with hopeful eyes. "Dad, can we?" "I'm really cold." The man hesitated. Lucy could see he was not used to accepting help from others. He looked at her small apartment building, then at his son's pale face, then back at Lucy. She was young, maybe 22, with kind brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her clothes were simple and worn, but she looked honest. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We don't want to be any trouble." "It's no trouble," Lucy said, even though she was thinking about the bills on her table and the fact that she only had enough food for herself. "Come on, let's get out of this rain." She led them toward her building, walking quickly through the storm. The man grabbed a small bag from his car and locked it, then picked up his son and carried him. Lucy noticed how gently he held the boy, and it made her feel a little better about her decision. Her apartment building was old and needed paint, but it was better than standing in the rain. Lucy unlocked the front door and led them up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2B. Her hands shook a little as she opened her door, suddenly aware of how small and poor her home must look to these well-dressed strangers. The apartment had a tiny living room with an old couch, a small kitchen with a card table for eating, and 1 bedroom. The furniture was old and mismatched, but everything was clean. Lucy had worked hard to make it feel like home, even with so little money. "It's not much," she said, feeling embarrassed, "but it's warm and dry." The man looked around and smiled. "It's perfect. Thank you so much. I'm Dan, by the way. Dan Carter. And this is my son, Jake." "I'm Lucy Martinez," she replied, hanging her wet jacket on a hook by the door. "Let me get you some towels, and I'll make some hot soup. That should help warm you both up." As she hurried to get towels from her small linen closet, Lucy wondered what she had gotten herself into. She did not have much money, and now she had 2 strangers in her apartment. But when she looked at Jake's grateful smile as she wrapped a towel around his shoulders, she knew she had made the right choice. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside her small apartment, 3 strangers were about to become something more. Lucy went straight to her small kitchen and opened the cabinet. She had 1 can of chicken soup, some crackers, and bread that was still good. It was not much, but it would have to do. She opened the can and poured it into a pot, adding some water to make it stretch further. While the soup heated up, she looked at Jake, who was sitting on her couch wrapped in the towel. His face was still pale, and she could see he had a fever. His father Dan sat beside him, looking worried. "Jake feels really warm," Dan said, touching his son's forehead. "I think he has a fever." Lucy nodded. "I have some things that might help." She went to her bathroom and found a bottle of fever medicine and a cool washcloth. Her grandmother had taught her how to take care of sick people when she was young, and she had learned well. She gave Jake the medicine with a glass of water and gently placed the cool cloth on his forehead. "This should help you feel better," she said softly. "My grandmother always did this for me when I was sick." Jake looked up at her with tired eyes. "Thank you, Miss Lucy. You're really nice." Lucy smiled. "Just Lucy is fine, and you're welcome." She went back to the kitchen to stir the soup. Dan followed her, keeping his voice low so Jake could not hear. "This is incredibly kind of you," he said. "We're complete strangers, and you're taking care of us like family." "I don't know how to thank you," Lucy shrugged, not looking at him. "Anyone would do the same thing. Your son is sick, and there's a bad storm outside. I couldn't just leave you there." Dan shook his head. "No, not everyone would do this. Most people would have just walked by." He paused, watching her stir the soup. "You don't have much yourself, do you?" Lucy felt her face get warm. She was embarrassed that he could see how poor she was. "I have enough," she said quietly. "I work hard and I get by." "What kind of work do you do?" Dan asked. "I'm a waitress at Murphy's Diner downtown. It's not much, but it pays the rent." She did not mention that she was behind on rent or that she worked extra shifts just to buy food. "What about you? What kind of work do you do?" Dan was quiet for a moment. "I work in business, nothing too exciting." He did not say that he owned one of the biggest companies in the state, or that he was worth millions of dollars. For some reason, he wanted this kind young woman to treat him like a normal person. Lucy brought bowls of soup to the living room, along with crackers and some sandwiches she had made with the last of her bread and cheese. "I'm sorry it's not more," she said. "I wasn't expecting company." "This looks wonderful," Dan said, and he meant it. He could not remember the last time someone had cooked for him just to be kind. Usually people wanted something from him because of his money and power. Jake ate slowly, but he seemed to be feeling a little better. The fever medicine was working, and the warm soup helped too. Lucy sat in the old chair across from them, eating her own small portion. "Tell me about yourself, Lucy," Dan said. "Do you have family here?" Lucy shook her head. "My parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. They were good people, but we never had much money. They taught me that being kind to others was more important than being rich." She smiled sadly. "I miss them every day." "I'm sorry," Dan said softly. "That must have been very hard." "It was. But they taught me to be strong and to help people when I can. Even if I don't have much to give, I can still be kind." Dan felt something stir in his chest. This young woman had lost so much, yet she was still generous and caring. She reminded him of his own mother, who had died when he was young. His mother had been poor too, but she had always helped others. After she died, and he became successful, he had forgotten those lessons. Jake finished his soup and looked up at Lucy. "Miss Lucy, do you have any books? I like stories." Lucy's face lit up. "I have a few books. Let me see what I can find." She went to her bedroom and came back with 3 children's books. They were old and worn, but the pictures were still bright. "These were mine when I was little," she said, sitting next to Jake on the couch. "My mom used to read them to me every night." Jake picked up a book about a brave little mouse. "Will you read this one to me?" Lucy looked at Dan, who nodded with a smile. "Of course," she said. As Lucy read the story, Dan watched his son's face. Jake was smiling and laughing at the funny parts. It had been months since Dan had seen his son this happy and relaxed. Since the divorce, Jake had been quiet and sad most of the time. Dan worked long hours and traveled often, and he knew he was not a very good father. But here, in this tiny apartment with this kind stranger, Jake was acting like a normal, happy child again. Dan felt guilty that it took a stranger to make his son smile. "That was a good story," Jake said when Lucy finished. "Do you know any other stories?" "Not from books, but stories you made up." Lucy thought for a moment. "Well, I know some stories my grandmother told me. They're about a magical forest where animals can talk and help people who are lost." Jake's eyes got wide. "Really? Tell me one." For the next hour, Lucy told Jake stories about brave rabbits and wise old owls. She made different voices for each character, and Jake giggled at the funny parts. Dan found himself listening too, amazed by Lucy's imagination and the way she could make his son so happy. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Lightning flashed through the windows and thunder shook the old building. But inside the small apartment, it felt warm and safe. Dan could not remember feeling this peaceful in years. When Jake finally fell asleep on the couch, Lucy covered him with her warmest blanket. She whispered to Dan, "He can sleep in my bed. It will be more comfortable." "Are you sure?" Dan asked. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll sleep in this chair. I've done it before when I was too tired to make it to the bedroom after work." Dan felt another wave of guilt. This young woman was giving up her bed for his son, and she was planning to sleep in an uncomfortable chair. "Lucy, I can't let you do that. I'll sleep in the chair." Lucy shook her head firmly. "You're my guests. Besides, you're bigger than me. You would not fit in that chair." Dan wanted to argue, but he could see that Lucy had made up her mind. As she gently carried Jake to her bedroom and tucked him in, Dan realized something important. For the first time in years, he was in a place where people cared about each other more than money or success. He sat on the couch, listening to the storm outside and thinking about his life. Tomorrow he would have to go back to his world of business meetings and expensive suits. But tonight, he was just a father whose son was safe and happy, thanks to the kindness of a stranger who had almost nothing but gave everything she could. Lucy woke up in the chair with a stiff neck and sore back. The storm had stopped during the night, and morning sunlight was coming through her small windows. She looked at the clock on the wall and saw it was 7 in the morning. She had slept for only a few hours, but she felt glad that her guests were safe and warm. She could hear quiet voices from her bedroom. Jake was awake and talking to his father in whispers. Lucy smiled, remembering how peaceful the little boy had looked when she tucked him into her bed the night before. Lucy stood up slowly, stretching her aching muscles. She went to the kitchen and looked in her refrigerator. She had 3 eggs, some milk, and a little bit of cheese left. It would be enough to make breakfast for all of them, though it meant she would have nothing to eat later. She started cooking the eggs and making toast with the last of her bread. The smell of food cooking filled the small apartment, and soon she heard footsteps behind her. "Good morning," Dan said softly. He looked much better than he had the night before. His clothes were still wrinkled from sleeping in them, but his face looked rested. "Did you sleep at all in that chair?" "I slept fine," Lucy lied, not wanting him to feel bad. "How is Jake feeling this morning?" "Much better, thanks to you. His fever is gone, and he slept all night without coughing." Dan watched her cooking. "You're making breakfast for us too," Lucy nodded. "It's just scrambled eggs and toast, but it should give you energy for the day." Dan felt that familiar guilt again. This young woman was using the last of her food to feed them, and she acted like it was nothing special. In his world, people only gave things away when they wanted something in return. But Lucy seemed to expect nothing except the chance to help. Jake came out of the bedroom, looking much healthier than he had the night before. His color was back to normal, and he was smiling. "Hi, Lucy. I slept really good in your bed. It's very comfortable." "I'm glad you feel better," Lucy said, ruffling his hair. "Are you hungry?" "Yes, and thank you for the stories last night. I dreamed about the talking animals in the magic forest." Lucy served breakfast on her small table. The 3 of them sat close together, and Jake chattered happily about his dreams and the stories Lucy had told him. Dan watched his son with amazement. Jake had not been this talkative and cheerful in months. "Lucy, do you have any kids?" Jake asked between bites of eggs. "No, I don't," Lucy said. "But I like children. You're a very good boy, Jake." Jake beamed at the compliment. "When I grow up, I want to help people like you do." Dan felt his throat get tight with emotion. His son was learning more about kindness from Lucy in one night than Dan had taught him in years. After breakfast, Dan's phone rang. It was the mechanic calling to say their car was fixed and ready to pick up. Dan felt sad that their time with Lucy was ending, but he knew they had to go back to their real lives. "The car is ready," he told Lucy and Jake. "We should probably get going soon." Jake's face fell. "Do we have to leave? Can't we stay longer?" "We have to go home, son. But maybe we can visit Lucy again sometime." Lucy felt sad too, but she tried not to show it. "You two have been wonderful guests. I'm glad I could help." Dan reached into his wallet and pulled out several $100 bills. "Please, let me pay you for everything. The food, the bed, your kindness. You've done so much for us." Lucy stepped back, looking hurt and angry. "I don't want your money. I didn't help you because I wanted to be paid. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. But you used your own food, gave up your bed. Double quotes Don started to say. And I did it because I wanted to," Lucy said firmly. "Taking money for being kind would make it feel wrong. Please put that away." Dan had never met anyone who refused money before. In his business world, everything had a price. But Lucy was different. She was offended by the idea of being paid for her kindness. "I'm sorry," he said, putting the money back in his wallet. "I didn't mean to insult you. I just wanted to help you like you helped us." Lucy's face softened. "I know you meant well, but helping each other is what people should do. We don't need to pay each other for being human." They gathered Dan and Jake's things, and Lucy walked them downstairs to wait for their ride. Jake hugged Lucy tightly. "I'm going to miss you, Lucy," he said. "You're the nicest person I ever met." "I'll miss you too, Jake. Remember to be kind to others, okay?" "I will, I promise." Dan shook Lucy's hand. "Thank you for everything. I hope we can see you again soon. Maybe Jake and I could take you to dinner sometime to thank you properly." Lucy smiled. "I would like that. You're both welcome here any time." A black car pulled up in front of the building. It was much fancier than the broken-down car from the night before. Lucy noticed that the driver was wearing a uniform and called Dan Mr. Carter very respectfully. She wondered why Dan had such an expensive car service, but she did not ask Dot as they drove away. Jake waved from the back window until the car turned the corner. Lucy waved back, feeling lonely as her small apartment building became quiet again. She went back upstairs and found an envelope on her kitchen table. Inside were the same bills Dan had tried to give her earlier, along with a note that said, "Thank you for showing us what real kindness looks like. Please accept this as a gift, not payment. Dan and Jake." Lucy felt angry and hurt again. She had told him clearly that she did not want money, but he had left it anyway. It made her feel like he thought she was lying about not wanting payment, or that he could not understand why someone would help without expecting something back. She put the envelope in her purse, planning to give it back to him if she ever saw him again. Then she sat down at her table and looked at the pile of bills waiting there. Her rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $50 short. The money Dan left would solve all her problems, but taking it felt wrong. Her neighbor, Mrs. Brooks, knocked on the door. She was an elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door and always knew everything that happened in the building. "Lucy, dear, I saw you had visitors last night," Mrs. Brooks said, looking curious. "That was quite a fancy car that picked them up this morning. And the driver was wearing a uniform like they work for someone very important." Lucy shrugged. "They were just travelers whose car broke down. Nice people, but I probably won't see them again." Mrs. Brooks looked like she wanted to say more, but Lucy was tired and wanted to be alone. After her neighbor left, Lucy sat in her chair and tried not to think about how empty and quiet her apartment felt without Jake's laughter and Dan's gentle voice. She had no idea that her act of kindness would change her life in ways she could never imagine. 3 days passed and Lucy's life became much worse. She had tried to pay her rent with the money she earned at the diner, but it was not enough. Her landlord, Mr. Garcia, was not a mean man, but he had bills to pay too. He gave her an eviction notice that said she had 1 week to pay the full amount or move out. Lucy sat at her kitchen table, looking at the notice and crying. She had lived in this small apartment for 2 years. It was not much, but it was her home. She did not know where she would go if she had to leave. She could not afford any other place in town, and she had no family to help her. She looked at the envelope Dan had left on her table. The money inside would pay her rent and buy food for a month. But every time she thought about using it, she felt sick to her stomach. It felt like taking charity, and that was not who she was. Lucy had been packing her few belongings into cardboard boxes when someone knocked on her door. She wiped her tears and opened it, expecting to see Mrs. Brooks, or maybe her landlord. Instead, she saw Jake standing in the hallway with a woman in expensive business suit. The woman was tall and professional looking, with short blonde hair and a briefcase in her hand. "Lucy," Jake shouted happily, running to hug her. "I missed you so much. I asked my dad every day if we could come see you." Lucy was so surprised. She could barely speak. "Jake, What are you doing here? Where's your father? The woman in the suit stepped forward. Hello, Miss Martinez. My name is Linda Shaw. I work for Daniel Carter. He sent me to check on you, and Jake insisted on coming along. Daniel Carter? Lucy repeated, confused. You mean Dan? Linda looked surprised. You didn't know? Daniel Carter is the CEO of Carter Industries. It's one of the biggest companies in the state. He's worth about $50 million. Lucy felt like someone had hit her in the stomach. She sat down hard in her chair, staring at Linda with her mouth open. $50 million? Jake nodded proudly. My dad owns lots of companies and buildings. He's really important. But he said you were the nicest person he ever met, and that's more important than money. Lucy's mind was spinning. The man she had given soup and her bed to was one of the richest people in the state. She had felt sorry for him, thinking he was just a regular person having car trouble. Now she felt stupid and embarrassed. He lied. To me, she said quietly. He told me he worked in business, but he didn't say he was rich. Linda sat down across from Lucy. Mr. Carter didn't mean to lie. He told me that people usually treat him differently when they know about his money. Everyone wants something from him. But you treated him like a normal person, and that meant a lot to him. Where is he now? Lucy asked. He's waiting in the car downstairs. He wanted to come up, but he wasn't sure you would want to see him. Jake finally convinced him that we should check on you. Jake looked around the apartment and saw the boxes. Lucy, why are you packing? Are you moving? Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears again. I have to move, Jake. I can't afford to live here anymore. What do you mean? Jake asked, looking worried. Linda noticed the eviction notice on the table. She read it quickly, then looked at Lucy with concern. You're being evicted? When? I have 4 days to pay my rent or leave, Lucy said, trying not to cry in front of Jake. I work as hard as I can, but it's not enough. Jake's eyes got wide and sad. But this is your home. You can't leave, Linda stood up. Miss Martinez, I think Mr. Carter should know about this. May I ask him to come up? Lucy wanted to say no. She was embarrassed and angry and confused. But Jake was looking at her with such worried eyes that she nodded. A few minutes later, Dan came up the stairs. He looked nervous and unsure, very different from the confident businessman she now knew he really was. He was wearing another expensive suit, and Lucy could see a fancy watch on his wrist that probably cost more than she made in a year. Hello. Lucy, he said softly. I hope it's okay that we came by. Jake has been asking about you every day. Lucy looked at him with hurt in her eyes. You didn't tell me who you really were. Dan sat down carefully, like he was afraid she might ask him to leave. You're right, and I'm sorry. But Lucy, when people know I'm rich, they change. They become fake and try to get money from me. But you treated me and Jake like family just because we needed help. I haven't felt that kind of real kindness in years. So you thought I was too stupid to figure it out? Lucy asked. No, Dan said quickly. I thought you were the smartest, kindest person I'd met in a long time. I was afraid that if you knew about the money, you might not be yourself anymore. Jake climbed onto Lucy's lap. Dad talks about you all the time. He says you reminded him how to be a good person. And you made me feel better when I was sick. Dad says that's more valuable than all his money. Lucy felt her anger starting to fade, but she was still hurt. I fed you soup from a can and gave you my bed because I thought you needed help. Now I find out you could buy this whole building if you wanted to. Dan nodded. You could have. And that night with you and Jake was the best night I've had in years. You showed me what I'd been missing by always thinking about business and money. Linda cleared her throat. Mr. Carter, perhaps we should discuss Miss Martinez's situation. Dan looked at the boxes and the eviction notice. Lucy, are you losing your apartment? Lucy felt embarrassed again. Here she was, being evicted, while sitting across from a man who could solve her problems without even thinking about it. I'm behind on rent. I'll figure something out. How much do you owe? Dan asked. It doesn't matter, Lucy said firmly. I'm not taking charity. It's not charity, Dan said. I owe you much more than money. You took care of my son when he was sick. You shared your food with us when you barely had enough for yourself. You showed us both what real kindness looks like. Jake hugged Lucy tighter. Please don't move away. Lucy, I want to visit you again. Dan leaned forward. Lucy, I want to offer you a job at my company. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I need someone like you working with me. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle and who knows how to treat people with kindness. Lucy stared at him. A job? What kind of job? I want to start a program to help families who are having hard times like you are now. I need someone to run it who really understands what these families are going through. Someone who has been there herself. Linda nodded. The salary would be enough to pay your rent and live comfortably. And you'd be helping other people who need it. Lucy felt overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part of her was suspicious. You're just doing this because you feel guilty about lying to me. Dan shook his head. I'm doing this because you're exactly the kind of person I need on my team. Someone who cares more about helping people than making money. Jake looked up at Lucy with hopeful eyes. Say yes, Lucy. Then I can see you all the time. Lucy looked around her small apartment, with its boxes and eviction notice and empty refrigerator. Then she looked at Jake's sweet face and Dan's earnest expression. Maybe this was her chance to help other people the way she wished someone could help her. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Dan said. But Lucy, please let me pay your rent while you decide. Not as charity, but as an apology for not being honest with you from the start. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Okay, but only as a loan. I'll pay you back. Lucy spent 3 days thinking about Dan's job offer. She walked around the city, visited the library, and talked to Amy at the diner. Everyone told her she would be crazy not to take the job, but Lucy was still worried. She did not want people to think she was only getting the job because Dan felt sorry for her. On Friday morning, Dan called her. Have you made a decision about the job? He asked. I want to see your company first, Lucy said. I want to understand what the job really is before I say yes. Of course. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll have Linda show you around and explain everything. That afternoon, Lucy took the bus to the business district downtown. She had never been in this part of the city before. The buildings were tall and made of glass and steel. People in expensive suits walked quickly down the sidewalks, talking on their phones. Carter Industries was in the biggest building on the block. Lucy felt nervous as she walked through the fancy lobby with its marble floors and crystal lights. She told the security guard her name, and he called upstairs. Linda came down to meet her. Hello, Lucy. Welcome to Carter Industries. Are you ready for the tour? Lucy followed Linda into an elevator that went up to the 20th floor. The offices were beautiful, with large windows and modern furniture. Everyone looked busy and important. This is where our main business happens, Linda explained as they walked down a hallway. We own stores, restaurants, and office buildings all over the state. Mr. Carter started the company 10 years ago, and it's grown very fast. They stopped at a conference room where several people in suits were having a meeting. These are our managers, Linda said. They run the day-to-day business while Mr. Carter makes the big decisions. Lucy felt more nervous. Everyone looked so smart and educated. I don't know anything about business, she told Linda. I only finished high school. These people probably all went to college. Linda smiled. The job we have in mind for you doesn't require a business degree. It requires something much more important, a good heart and real experience with the problems we want to solve. They took the elevator up to the 25th floor. This area looked different from the business floors. It was smaller and quieter, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. "This is where we're starting the new community outreach program," Linda explained. "Right now, it's just an empty office, but we want it to become the heart of our charity work." Dan was waiting for them in the main office. He looked more relaxed than he had at Lucy's apartment, but his eyes were still kind. Jake was with him, sitting at a small table and coloring in a book. "Lucy!" Jake shouted, running to hug her. "Did you come to see where my dad works?" "Yes, I did," Lucy said, hugging him back. "It's a very big place." Dan stood up from his desk. "What do you think so far?" "It's impressive," Lucy said honestly. "But I still don't understand what you want me to do here." Dan walked over to a wall covered with photos. "These are pictures of families in our community who are struggling. Single mothers who can't pay for childcare. Elderly people who can't afford their medicine. Families who might lose their homes like you almost did." Lucy looked at the photos. She saw her own story in many of the faces. People who worked hard, but still couldn't make ends meet. "I want to help these families," Dan continued. "But I don't know how. I've been rich for so long that I don't remember what it's like to worry about rent money or choosing between food and medicine." "But you do," Linda added, looking at Lucy. "You know exactly what these families are going through because you've lived it. You know what kind of help they really need, not just what rich people think they need." Dan nodded. "I want you to create programs that actually help people. Maybe it's paying for childcare so a mother can work. Maybe it's helping with medical bills or rent when families have emergencies. You would decide how to use the money in ways that really make a difference." Lucy felt a spark of excitement. This was not just a job, it was a chance to help people like herself. People who worked hard but sometimes needed a little help to get by. "How much money would I have to work with?" she asked. "We're starting with $5 million for the first year," Dan said. Lucy's eyes got wide. $5 million? That's just the beginning. If the program works well, we'll do more." Dan looked serious. "Lucy, I make more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It's time I used some of it to help people instead of just making more." Jake looked up from his coloring. "Dad says you taught him that helping people is better than having lots of money." Lucy felt tears in her eyes. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. What if I make mistakes? What if I'm not good enough for this job? Dan smiled. "Lucy, you took in 2 strangers during a storm and shared the last of your food with them. You knew exactly how to take care of a sick child. You have all the skills you need for this job." Linda handed Lucy a folder. "Here's the job description and salary information. Take your time to look it over." Lucy opened the folder and saw a number that made her gasp. The salary was more money than she had ever dreamed of making. It was enough to live comfortably and still save money for the future. "This is too much," she said. "It's exactly what this job is worth," Dan replied. "You'll be working hard and making important decisions. You deserve to be paid well for it." Lucy looked around the office again, then at the photos of families who needed help. She thought about her own struggles and how good it felt to help Dan and Jake. This job would let her help hundreds of families. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll take the job." Jake cheered and hugged her legs. Dan smiled bigger than she had ever seen him smile. "Welcome to Carter Industries," Linda said, shaking Lucy's hand. Over the next 6 months, Lucy threw herself into her new job. She visited families in their homes, listened to their stories, and found ways to help them. She set up programs for emergency rent assistance, medical bill help, and child care support. Every family she helped reminded her of her own struggles, and she made sure they were treated with dignity and respect. Dan often stopped by her office to see how things were going. Sometimes he brought Jake, who loved to help Lucy sort through applications and letters from families. Lucy found herself looking forward to these visits. Dan was different at work than he had been that stormy night, more serious and businesslike, but he was still the same kind man who had worried about his sick son. One evening in December, Lucy was working late when Dan knocked on her office door. "Don't you think it's time to go home?" he asked. Lucy looked up from her desk, which was covered with papers. "I just want to finish reviewing these applications. There are so many families who need help for Christmas." Dan came into the office and sat down across from her desk. "You know, when I offered you this job, I thought you might help a few dozen families, but you've already helped over 300 families in 6 months." Lucy smiled. "It doesn't feel like work when you love what you're doing." "I've learned a lot from watching you," Dan said. "You've reminded me why I wanted to be successful in the first place. Not just to make money, but to make a difference." Jake appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. He had been napping in Dan's office while waiting for his father to finish work. "Are we going home now?" Jake asked. "In a few minutes, buddy," Dan said. "Why don't you sit with Lucy while I check my messages?" Jake climbed into the chair next to Lucy's desk. "Lucy, are you going to spend Christmas with us? Dad said he wants to ask you, but he's too nervous." Lucy looked at Dan, who had turned red. "Your dad wants me to spend Christmas with you?" Dan cleared his throat. "Well, yes. Jake and I don't have any other family, and you've become very important to both of us. We thought maybe you'd like to join us for Christmas dinner." Lucy felt warm inside. "I would love that." Jake clapped his hands. "This is going to be the best Christmas ever." As they rode down in the elevator together, Lucy thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a struggling waitress facing eviction. Now she had a job she loved, financial security, and most importantly, she had Dan and Jake in her life. When they reached the lobby, Dan turned to her. "Lucy, there's something else I want to ask you. Jake and I were wondering if you'd like to go to dinner with us this weekend. Not for business, just because we enjoy spending time with you." Lucy smiled. "I'd like that very much." As they walked out into the December evening, with snow beginning to fall, Lucy realized that helping 2 strangers on a stormy night had led to the best thing that had ever happened to her. She had found not just a job and financial security, but a family who cared about her as much as she cared about them. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness could change everything.